There are souls that do not break with a cry. They break in silence. No one hears it, no one sees it. The world keeps turning, but inside them something has snapped, not with an explosion, but with the heavy breath of midnight. That is the moment an empath begins to disappear. Not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Not out of hatred, but because the soul needs to rest. From the outside, no one notices. They still smile, still care, still move gently as if nothing has changed. But the light in their eyes is different, no longer shining for others, but pulling inward, retreating into the depths to find itself again. Every awakening begins with a collapse. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And for the empath, that journey doesn't happen under stage lights, but in a silent room where the heart learns to stop bleeding for the world. When you have loved too deeply, stayed too long, forgiven too much, and gone silent for so long that even you can no longer hear yourself, that is not weakness. It is the soul signaling rebirth. Because sometimes, to become untouchable, you must disappear. Disappear from shallow conversations, from relationships that only take from the roles you once played in order to be loved. Disappear, not to escape, but to rebuild in the darkness where the seed of a new life is beginning to grow. This is not a story for curious ears, but for tired hearts. For those who have fallen in silence, who vanished without anyone noticing, and one day returned not as victims, but as beings who can no longer be touched. For the silence the world sees as weakness is, in truth, the sacred language of a soul coming home. And in that language, the empath learns one thing, that to be truly seen, they must first dare to disappear. Below is the full, faithful English translation, natural, accurate, and intact in meaning, tone, and depth. Nothing added, nothing removed. The disappearance of an empath never happens in a single day. It unfolds slowly, very slowly, like light retreating behind a curtain, like a candle that knows it is about to burn out, but still tries to shine a little longer so no one notices. From the outside they still smile, still work, still talk as usual, but there is one small detail only those who have known pain can recognize. Their eyes no longer settle anywhere for too long. When someone speaks to them, they still nod, but their mind has wandered somewhere else to a place no one can touch. They start replying to messages more slowly, their voice softens, and their presence fades like early morning mist. Not because they want to hurt anyone, but because they are pulling their energy back in order to survive. Empaths often don't know how to rest until the soul forces them to stop. They have carried too many emotions that weren't theirs. Other people's sadness, other people's responsibilities, apologies that were never spoken. Gradually they realize exhaustion is not only physical fatigue, but a spiritual emptiness the moment you realize you are still alive, yet no longer feel like you truly exist. When that happens, they are not angry. They are simply quiet. No arguments, no dramatic, "I'm leaving," no slamming doors. They quietly gather back every piece of their energy they once gave away too easily. Their withdrawal is like the tide pulling back. No one knows when it started. They only notice the shoreline is suddenly empty. People around them call it distance, change, or coldness. But they don't understand that this distance is a survival mechanism, a soft armor that allows the soul to breathe. Jung once said, "A person only begins to live when they touch the dark." Right? And it is in this withdrawal that the empath begins to touch theirs. They realize silence is no longer a punishment, but a medicine. They stop seeking to be understood, stop explaining themselves, stop trying to keep connections that no longer offer reciprocity. Instead of shouting to be heard, they begin listening to themselves. Their evenings change, no longer filled with long conversations meant to soothe someone else. No more comforting messages, no more "I'm okay." They sit in the dark, listening to their own heartbeat, hearing their thoughts drift by like wind. There they realize, all these years, they have never truly been alone with themselves. And in that stillness, something subtle happens. The fear of loneliness begins to dissolve. They realize silence doesn't kill them, it heals them. Distance isn't loss. It is how their soul retrieves its boundaries. When they stop chasing validation, the world loses its power to define them. This is the first step of disappearing, the gentle withdrawal. No noise, no tears, no dramatic scenes. Just a shift in energy from outward to inward. They no longer shine to be seen. They begin to shine to stay whole. Because sometimes the only way to find yourself is to stop speaking, stop explaining, stop being the rescuer. And in that silence, the empath learns a profound truth. No one truly sees you until you stop trying to be seen. After the light pulls back, the empath enters a stage few people understand: voluntary isolation. Not isolation out of fear or anger, but to breathe. They stop chasing everything: work, praise, affection, even the obsession with being understood. Everything goes quiet. At first, the silence feels like a void with no echo. But then, inside that emptiness, they begin to hear what they forgot long ago: the voice of their own soul. The cocoon is not a gentle place. It is a small room filled with memories, where every wound once hidden under smiles now rises to the surface. They remember every time they were hurt, but said it's okay. Every sleepless night spent comforting someone who never asked if they were all right. These memories feel like knives at first, but gradually they become teachers. Each memory brings a lesson. Kindness does not mean enduring. Love does not mean accepting pain. Forgiveness does not mean staying. In the darkness of the cocoon, all roles fall away. No more the strong one, the healer, the peacemaker. They are left only with their raw self, vulnerable, tired, and real. This is the moment Jung called Nigredo, the black stage of soul transformation. All illusions collapse. The illusion of love that saves. The illusion of goodness being rewarded. The illusion that giving enough will make someone love you properly. It hurts, but it is the pain of truth. And there, the seed of rebirth is planted. The empath learns to sit with sadness without running away. They let the pain speak, let the tears fall without shame. Each tear is rain washing away the dust of years spent pretending to be fine. Then they realize silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. Inside the cocoon, they learn again how to breathe, eat, sleep, and live without effort. They stop trying to heal others. They begin healing themselves with the smallest acts: a morning cup of tea, a journal page written with honest tears, a song that needs no witness. This is the stage where the outside world misunderstands them most. People think they have disappeared, lost direction, fallen into depression. But in truth, they are reassembling their own energy. Like a caterpillar turning to liquid before becoming a butterfly, a temporary death preparing for new life. As this transformation happens, they begin to see clearly what was once hidden. They see who truly cares and who only cared when benefiting. They notice how people react to their silence. The sincere become concerned. The controlling become angry. These reactions reveal the truth of relationships they once clung to blindly. In this isolation, the empath is no longer a victim of others' emotions. They become an observer, seeing the pain without dissolving into it. They begin to distinguish: this is mine, this is someone else's energy. And that moment is a turning point. They stop absorbing and start choosing. This is the real meaning of healing silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but of awakening. They are learning how to exist without losing themselves. They are building their first sacred boundary, not with people, but with their old mental habits. When an empath enters this cocoon, the world thinks they are disappearing, but in truth they are being reshaped. In stillness, they melt away everything built from fear, preparing to emerge as who they were meant to be. And here is the secret few know. In the darkness of isolation, they are not weakening. They are liquefying so that one day they will rise. During this stage, they release the habits that once defined them, not through rebellion, but through the exhaustion of meaning. Phrases like, I have to help them, I must be kind, I should endure a bit more, now echo like distant voices. They no longer believe in the slogans, "Love conquers all," because they finally understand love cannot conquer when only one person is fighting. The empath experiences this inner death not in blood and tears, but in the shedding of what once felt sacred. They let go of the need to be understood. They let go of the savior role. They let go of the illusion that sacrifice can redeem someone. Each thing they release is painful because it was tied to an identity they once believed was truly themselves. But the truth is, it never was. It was only the skin of fear, fear of abandonment, fear of being called selfish, fear that without giving they would not be worthy. This inner death is silent, but real. It is like looking in the mirror and no longer wanting to pretend to be okay. Like smiling out of politeness but feeling no response in the heart. Like hearing an apology and feeling tired instead of comforted, not because of bitterness, but because the soul knows it is time to stop. This inner death is not collapse, but liberation. It cuts the invisible strings tying them to those who manipulated them with guilt. It separates them from relationships of dependence, where their existence depended on pleasing others. And in that separation, a vast emptiness opens. But the remarkable thing is, for the first time, they are not afraid of it. Because deep down, they know only when the old self dies can the true self be born. Jung once wrote, "There is no rebirth without a death." The empath now understands this through lived experience, not theory. They see clearly that to grow, the soul sometimes must burn even what once seemed virtuous, not to become cruel, but to become real. Because kindness is no longer about always saying yes, but about being able to say no when it saves themselves. During this stage, they often feel empty, directionless, no longer interested in shallow conversations, surface-level relationships, or social games. They need space for the transformation unfolding quietly within, like a seed cracking in the dark soil before touching light. The death of the old identity also ends the illusion of control. They stop wanting to change others. Stop wanting to prove what is right or wrong. Stop wanting to be understood. They let things dissolve, and in that dissolution, something miraculous happens. They begin to feel a peace that depends on no one. A deep peace needing no explanation, needing no approval. The empath now is no longer the good person by old standards. They become still, even unpredictable. But behind that stillness is a wisdom born from ashes. They understand that to be free, part of them must die. And this is not a tragic death, it is the initiation of a mature soul. For only when the old ego dissolves does the heart have room to love, not out of need, but out of awareness. Not to save someone, but to walk beside them. Not to be seen, but to see themselves. This is the deepest turning point of the journey. When the empath stops living to make others happy and starts living in truth with their own soul. This death is unseen by others, but it is the beginning of real life. But the remarkable thing is, for the first time, they are not afraid of it. Because deep down, they know only when the old self dies can the true self be born. Jung once wrote, "There is no rebirth without a death." The empath now understands this through lived experience, not theory. They see clearly that to grow, the soul sometimes must burn even what once seemed virtuous, not to become cruel, but to become real. It is the anger they never dared to express, the envy they once condemned as sinful, the deep desires suffocated by the image of being a good person. When they withdraw from the outer world, all those parts begin to surface. And for the first time, they no longer avoid them. They sit still and let the darkness speak. No judgment, no rejection, only observation. They realize behind the anger is a sense of betrayal. Behind the envy is a longing to be seen. Behind the need for control is the fear of being abandoned. And in the moment they look directly at these things without running away, a deep kind of healing begins. Jung called this moment shadow integration, the union with the shadow, because no one can become whole by living only in the light. Empaths once believed that as long as they loved, forgave, and understood, it would be enough, but they forgot. A soul cannot truly love until it has learned to love the dark within itself. This is when they face the very things that once hurt them the most. They realize they were angry at the narcissist for manipulating, but deep down they too had manipulated with kindness, with endurance, with making others feel guilty for leaving. They were afraid of being controlled. Yet they themselves tried to fix others to keep them from going. When they see this, they no longer condemn themselves. They simply say, "Now I understand." And the truth is, the shadow does not need to be destroyed, it needs to be acknowledged. When they dare step into their own inner darkness, they begin to understand the real mechanism of their wounds. They see why they once chose unhealthy relationships, not because they were weak, but because the subconscious was trying to complete an unfinished lesson. They realize the people who hurt them were not enemies, but mirrors reflecting the parts they had forgotten. This is a deeply conflicting stage. There are nights when they cry, not because of anyone else, but because they finally see all of themselves. They see the parts that once made them ashamed, the dark sides that once terrified them. But the miracle is, when they stop denying it, the darkness stops being frightening. It becomes a doorway to real strength. Because in that darkness they reclaim the right to be angry, to say no, to set boundaries, to choose themselves. They realize that kindness has no value without truth. Gentleness is no longer a virtue if it colludes with pain. The anger once suppressed now becomes protective energy. The fear of abandonment turns into the drive to stand on their own. The sensitivity once seen as a burden becomes a radar for what is real. They no longer want to escape the darkness, but to live in harmony with it. They understand that light is not what destroys darkness, but what gives it shape. This awareness turns the empath into a truly mature human being, no longer idealizing niceness, no longer seeing themselves as a victim, no longer treating the dark as an enemy. At this point, they no longer fear the narcissist, no longer fear being misunderstood, no longer fear being disliked, because they know that nothing in another person can hurt them more deeply than the part within themselves they have not yet accepted. And once they embrace that part, they become impossible to manipulate. They no longer react to attacks, no longer need to prove they are right. They look at everything with the eyes of someone who has walked through both heaven and hell and survived. In those eyes is the quiet of one who understands. No light is pure if it has never walked through the night. When darkness is accepted, it becomes strength. When a wound is seen, it becomes a doorway. And when the empath stops fighting what they feared most, they realize a great truth. They do not need to be healed in order to be loved. They only need to be real in order to be free. That is the moment darkness is no longer a threat, but the soil from which light grows. And on that very ground, the empath steps into a new chapter of their journey. No longer a victim of the world, but someone reborn from their own ashes. After facing the darkness, the empath enters a new phase, the phase of reclamation. They begin retrieving every fragment of energy they unconsciously gave away over years of living for others. No longer the giver in order to be loved, but the one who chooses to give from awareness. This is the turning point where they shift from living for others to living with themselves. At first, this is not easy, because the old system inside them, the habit of taking responsibility for others' emotions, has not yet dissolved. There are days they still feel guilty for saying no. There are nights they still wrestle with the fear of being too cold. But then they realize that guilt does not come from love. It comes from old programming, the very thing that once made them say yes, even when their soul was screaming for help. As this awareness grows, the empath begins practicing sacred boundaries, not as walls that shut people out, but as energetic fences that let their soul breathe. They learn how to say no without over-explaining, how to walk away without feeling cruel, how to listen to another's pain without dissolving into it. For them, this is the hardest art, to love without losing themselves. Carl Jung once said, "There is no awakening without pain." Oh? But he also added, after every expansion of consciousness, energy is withdrawn. When the empath understands this, They see that withdrawing energy from draining relationships is not selfishness, it is the law of balance. Each time they refuse something that is not true to them, they are pulling their energy back to center. These boundaries are not built from fear, but from awareness. They no longer react, they respond. They no longer need to prove, they simply live their truth. When someone comes with sweet words but distorted energy, they feel it immediately and choose silence. When someone tries to reopen the past, they do not explode, they simply do not engage. Their power now lies in non-reaction, not justification. And then something strange happens. The world begins to shift to their frequency. The old people manipulators, users, gradually fall away. New people appear, not looking to be saved, but wanting to grow together. The empath realizes real love does not need to be rescued, it needs to be respected. In this phase, they no longer need the crowd to understand them. They only need a clean space to be themselves. They return to nature, music, art, meditation, the things that once made them feel connected before the world wore them down. Slowly, they notice something unusual. Their energy no longer leaks. The body feels lighter, the mind clearer. Intuition returns stronger than ever. This is the stage of sovereignty, soul sovereignty. No one can dictate their feelings anymore. No compliment can intoxicate them. No insult can break them. They stand in the world like a pillar of light, soft yet unshakable, quiet yet full of life. They no longer try to forgive, to prove they are noble. Forgiveness comes naturally, like breathing, because they have cut all dependency. When there is no longer attachment, forgiveness is no longer an act, it is a state. They no longer try to let go, because there is nothing left to let go of. Whatever was not theirs has already fallen away. In this phase, they also understand a profound truth. Love is not about giving everything, but about giving rightly. Because love does not demand that you empty yourself. It teaches you to distinguish between sharing and self-sacrifice. They begin choosing relationships of reciprocity, where both people grow. They no longer feel the need to prove their goodness, because their conscious presence is already light. From here, their peace no longer depends on anyone. It comes from being honest with themselves. They learn to live without needing to be understood, to love without needing to be returned, to give without needing praise. Every action becomes as natural as breathing, not because they are numb, but because they have found freedom in not needing to control the outcome. This is the stage in which the empath returns to their true power, the power of simplicity. They no longer chase the light, because they are the light. They no longer search for love, because they are living as love. They no longer fear loss, because they know what is meant for them will come, and what no longer fits will naturally fall away. When you see them now, you may not recognize them anymore. Their light is no longer blinding, but warm, steady, grounded. They don't need to say much, don't need to convince anyone, don't need to perform. They simply exist, and their very presence is the answer to everything. Because the empath has completed the circle, from unconditional giving to dissolution, to confrontation, to rebirth. And now they live in the most silent power of every awakened soul, the right to be themselves, without asking permission from anyone. The return of an empath is never the same as an ex coming back. Because they do not return to continue what was unfinished, they return as a different version, a being who has walked through the hell of their own soul, dissolved, lost everything that used to define them, and then been reborn in silence. If before they lived to be understood, now they live to be true. If before they shone in order to be seen, now they radiate without needing an audience. An empath after rebirth is a living paradox. They carry the softest heart and the steadiest energy. They feel more deeply, yet are less easily wounded. They love more, yet cling less, because they no longer love from lack, but from awareness. Every relationship is no longer a place to prove their worth, but a mirror through which they observe themselves. They listen not to react, but to understand the frequency of the person before them. They speak less, but every word carries weight. No longer empty comfort, but truth spoken with kindness. People are often surprised when they meet them again. You are so different, they say, but they cannot name what has changed. Because what has changed is not the voice, the smile, or the clothes. It is the energy, invisible yet tangible. They no longer scatter their energy outward. They hold it within, like a still lake that can reflect the whole sky without having to do anything. In the eyes of the empath now, there is something special, a quietness that makes others feel both safe and unable to fully touch them. They are no longer shaken by praise, no longer shattered by rejection. They know their value does not live in anyone else's reaction. And precisely when they no longer need to be seen, they become more visible than ever. They move through the world with a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom of someone who runs away, but of someone who has returned. Returned to themselves. They no longer live in fear of losing connection, because they understand that true connection never demands the sacrifice of the soul. They no longer search for someone who understands me, because they have become the one who understands themselves. And that is enough. Carl Jung once said, "When we realize that the divine is nowhere else but within us, all pilgrimages come to an end." The empath now understands this in a way that is no longer theoretical. They once searched for love the way one searches for God, praying, sacrificing, believing blindly. But now they understand that God is not the person at the other end of the relationship, but the small voice they had long abandoned in their own heart. When they listen to that voice again, they no longer need to run anywhere. The world still tests them. Old people still come back with apologies, with regretful eyes, with what we used to have. But the empath no longer responds in the old ways. They do not seek revenge, nor do they go back. They simply smile. Not a cold smile, but a knowing one, because they know every soul is learning, just at different levels. Those who once hurt them are not inherently bad. They are simply not yet conscious enough to love. And that lesson no longer belongs to the empath. Their silence now is not avoidance, but discernment. They know not every voice deserves a response, not every battle needs to be fought, and not everyone is deep enough to truly meet them. They stop chasing fairness because they understand the justice of the soul does not operate by human logic. What they have lost will return in another form, on another energetic level, when they are ready to receive it. An empath, after returning, tends to live more slowly. They no longer chase goals to feel worthy. They do everything with a quiet awareness. They choose work, friends, and places to live based more on energetic resonance than on reasons. They understand that peace does not come from having everything, but from not needing everything. They no longer try to please anyone. They would rather live true and be misunderstood than live falsely and be adored. They would rather lose others than lose themselves. Because they have paid dearly for that lesson, the price of trading their essence to hold on to an illusion of love. Now they understand that true love will never ask you to choose between it and yourself. If you have to choose, it is no longer love, it is dependency. And from this point, the empath steps into the phase of quiet resurrection. They do not need to declare, "I've changed." Their presence is proof enough. When they enter a room, the energy shifts. When they speak, their words carry weight. When they are silent, others feel reflected. Because they no longer live as a good person, but as a real person. In work, they no longer seek validation through achievements, but through the sincerity they bring to each small act. In friendship, they choose depth over crowd. In love, they choose someone who shares their frequency, not someone before whom they must constantly prove their worth. Sometimes they still feel pain, but that pain no longer destroys them. It becomes a refining fire. Every emotion is now a signal, not a prison. The empath now understands that real strength is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to feel without being carried away. When angry, they do not explode. They observe anger like a cloud passing by. When sad, they do not run. They allow their tears to fall and then smile again. They no longer need to control themselves because they have become themselves, whole, honest, self-governed. One of the clearest signs of this stage is the peace they feel in silence. Before, silence was a burden, loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten. Now, silence is home. It is where they hear the heartbeat of the universe inside their own chest. In that silence, they sense clearly that life has never left them. It was just waiting for them to stop running and come back. An empath after rebirth does not try to be great. They only want to be faithful to their soul. Every action, every word becomes a small ritual of presence. They no longer feel the need to heal the world because they understand that by living authentically they already are healing. Because true light never tries to shine on anyone, it simply exists, and in its existence, everything around it naturally becomes brighter. They begin to use silence as a tool. Someone who once argued now only smiles. Someone who once endured now simply leaves. Someone who once explained now only observes. They no longer need a beautiful ending because they understand. Nothing truly ends. Everything only changes form to bring them closer to their true self. When they meet again those who once hurt them, they no longer need an apology because they no longer wait for others to take responsibility for their emotions. They thank those people not for the wounds, but because through them they learned what no school could teach, how to stand firm in solitude. Now, they no longer fear being alone because they realize solitude is the road on which God leads the soul back home.